Hey guys, wanted to do a little discipleship for you today. This was something that I was kind of reading this morning, and I kind of hear this verse all the time used a little bit out of context, or maybe that the emphasis or the focus is put in the wrong place, I think. And in Matthew 10, verse 42, the last verse of the chapter, it says, "And whosoever shall give unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward." And a lot of times what happens is that the emphasis is placed on the work. The emphasis is placed on giving giving the cup of cold water, and that's that is correct, but it's also not the primary emphasis of what this is referring to. And if you back up to verse 40, you can kind of see that. Jesus is talking to his disciples here, and he says, "He that receiveth you, receiveth me." So he's talking to the disciples, and he says that, I'm going to send you guys out there, and when you go out there, he that receives you, that takes you in, is also receiving me. And he that receives me receives him that sent me. So he's talking about he that receives you, the disciples, receives me, Jesus, and he that receives me, Jesus, receives the Father. So he's kind of drawing a line there because he's going to expound on this in verse 41. And he says, "He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward." Now what he's talking about there is he that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet. He's saying he that receives a prophet because he's a prophet, because he's one of my prophets, shall receive a prophet's reward. So if you receive a prophet because he is a prophet of Christ, then you are in essence participating in that prophet's ministry, and that you share in that prophet's reward. So he goes on here and he talks about and he that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones. Now who's he talking about, the little ones? Well, the little ones he's been talking about this whole time. One of these, he's talking about the disciples that he's sending out into the world. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water, only in the name of a disciple. So he's saying not just the fact that you're doing good works, not just the fact that you're doing good works for good works' sake, or that you're doing something as seemingly insignificant as just giving a cup of cold water. These are not things that in and of themselves are bringing you reward. What's bringing you the reward is doing the things that you're doing for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the ministry, for ultimately, as Jesus said in verse 40, for that line of succession talking about from the disciples through Christ to the Father. These individuals who are participating in God's work, but maybe they're not called to ministry. Each of us has not been called to some sort of a ministerial position. Not all of us have been called to be priests. Not all of us have been called to be pastors. Not all of us have been called to ministry directly. But some of us have been called with the opportunity to be able to support those who are called to ministry. And there's numerous places you can go to in the Bible to look at this, but one probably one of the best ones is in 1 Corinthians 3, I think it's verse 15 and 16. Paul is basically explaining to the church at Corinth that your good works are going to be tried based on the motivations, and that some of these motivations are going to be wood, hay, stubble. Some of these motivations are purely going to be, well, I was helping this individual out, well, because he's a friend of mine. And even Jesus talked about the fact that, peradventure a good man would die for one of his own, but for a stranger, that's something different. To die for a stranger or to die for an enemy, that is something completely different. The motivation behind it is what it is that determines whether or not this is wood, hay, stubble, and thus it gets burned by fire, or whether it's gold, silver, precious metal, whatever that that he's talking about in that 1 Corinthians passage, and that these things are refined by fire. And the idea is that sometimes the good works that we do just for the sake of good works, they ultimately lead to self-righteousness, which begins to make us feel good about ourselves, and the focus is all on us, and people are praising us, and the motivation is completely askewed. And what he's talking about here in this passage is that the work that you do for the sake of ministry, the work that you do, even something as insignificant as giving a cup of cold water to somebody who is working directly for the ministry, has this line of succession where you did it for him, therefore you did it for Jesus, therefore you did it for the Father. And that, in essence, is basically that line that you are participating in the ministry in your seemingly insignificant way, but you share equally in that prophet's reward. And he goes on to say in that last part of that passage, "Verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward." So I wanted to share that with you guys today. Check your motivations. Make sure that what you're doing for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the kingdom, because everything else just leads to pride and self-righteousness. So, all right, God bless.